Hi, friends. This is Will Parker, host of Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast, along with my co-host, Dr. Jen Schwanke. And before we jump into this week's interview with the amazing leader, Daman Harris, we're going to talk about our question of the week. So, Jen, you want to intro that for us?
Absolutely. So for those of you that have heard the last few questions of the week, these come from a really smart, sharp, eager group of Ohio State University students that I had the privilege of teaching this past semester, and they just had some questions for Will. So this question came from Christina Mahan, and she wanted to know about difficult conversations. So here was her question. As a principal, how did you approach difficult conversations with underperforming staff while maintaining their dignity and fostering their growth?
That's such a great question. You're going to hear me and Jen respond to it. And as we do, don't forget that the question of the week is supported by Summer Pops Math Workbooks. Principals, when students practice math over the summer, their math scores go up. So what is your summer math plan this year? A great way to start is by ordering your free summer workbook samples at summerpopsworkbooks.com.
Okay, the next question shifts a little bit away from hiring and retention and into difficult conversations. This is, I love this topic because it's something that I think everyone who's human struggles with. So, Christina, this is yours. Introduce yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, my name is Christina Mahan. I'm actually a middle school art teacher. And my question is, as a principal, how do you approach difficult conversations with underperforming staff while also maintaining dignity and fostering growth?
You know, the first thing that comes to mind, thank you for that question, Christina. The first thing that comes to my mind is
What? You need time for
how do I treat people like I want to be treated?
Right.
So if I'm being corrected, what do I want to be like on the other side of me? And so if my commitment in providing somebody feedback is I want to see them grow, then that's going to come across in the way I communicate. If what I'm communicating to them is you're frustrating, irritating me, and I'm tired of the way you're behaving, that's going to come across in the way I communicate it too. So it's the same thing. I hate to, I don't know, I don't think I'm going to burst any bubbles, but I'm just going to say it out loud. Communication with faculty, staff, peers, leaders, educators is really not that different than communicating with kids. And I know it seems like it should be because you're like, well, they're adults. They should just know things, or I can't talk down to them. And I'm not suggesting I don't talk down to kids. And so if you talk down to kids, then you're probably going to be somebody that talks down to adults. So the same respect that you address students with so that you can help them move from whatever their craziness that they're doing back to the thing that they should be doing is the same kind of communication skills that we should be using in leadership. And so I think that's the best I got, Jen. What would you add to that?
Well, somebody told me earlier in my career, I'm watching you all to see if you nod or if you roll your eyes. Somebody said we are what we teach, meaning we behave like the grade level that we teach. Okay, I got some laughs. I think there's some truth to that. I really do. And so if you have to have a difficult conversation with a first grade teacher, remember that first grade teacher spends all day with first graders. And so that's something to keep in mind, as opposed to if you walk in and have a difficult conversation with somebody who's working with graduating seniors in May. It doesn't mean you talk to them like that. It means you keep in mind who they work with every day, because we are what we teach. I think that's just
that's a really good distinction, Jen. Yeah, thank you for reminding me that because
exactly.
Yeah. I don't want to make the mistake of speaking to someone like a first grader. Please don't hear me saying that.
Right. You'd never want to do that. But you also want to keep in mind if somebody, like, let's say they're in a intense behavior unit all day, and then you've got to call them in at the end of the day and have a tricky conversation with them. Well, you might not want to do that. They could very well have been beat up that day. So think about what that message is and how you want to deliver it. Think about how they may have spent their day and what you want to do with that.
Yeah.
Did you had an intake of breath there? Did you have more to say?
There's so much more you can say, but I just think that maintaining dignity and fostering growth means that If the only time you're having conversations with teachers is when you're having to deliver bad news,
Exactly.
then you need to step up the times you're having conversations, because there already needs to be built-in relationships and ongoing. I know who your kids are and their birthdays, and I'm going to find out what soccer game was played this week, and we celebrate each other's families. And then when we have a hard conversations is within that context. So if the only time I'm ever talking to someone is when I'm delivering some directive or instruction, that I would take that wrong if that's the only communication
Right.
I'm receiving.
Well, exactly. And Will, you and I have talked about this on the podcast before. The worst, Principal 101, the worst thing you can do is say nothing to a teacher for 8 months and then have their post evaluation and blast them with, 20 things that they're doing wrong. Like if you haven't had that conversation ongoing, not fair to come in with a fastball when they're not ready for it.
You're listening to Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast.
Principal Matters Podcast, episode 448. Hi, friends. This is Will Parker, host of Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast, where each week we bring you inspiring, innovative, and imaginative ideas for your own school leadership. And this week I'm talking to my special guest, Dr. Daman Harris, about his great book, The Antiracist School Leader: What You Know, Say, and Do. Dr. Harris is a trailblazing expert in education, retention, and an anti-racist leader, and he is the co-founder and co-director of Building Our Network of Diversity Bond Project, a nonprofit that supports the recruitment, development, retention, and empowerment of male educators of color. He's also the senior manager for educator advancement and institutions of higher education partnerships for a large Mid-Atlantic school district. And during his 28 years as an educator, he has been a teacher, coach, principal, district administrator, adjunct professor, speaker, writer, and consultant. And he's the author of a great Solution Tree Press book called The Anti-Racist School Leader: What to Know, Say, and Do, and the host of the podcast Bondcast. Dr. Daman Harris, welcome to Principal Matters Podcast. I'm so excited to introduce you to my listeners. Why don't you fill in the gaps on that intro and tell listeners something else they may be surprised to know about you?
Right. Thank you, Will. I am so excited to be here, and I'm grateful for the folks who are listening, giving me a little bit of their time and attention. I think that the thing that I'll start with is, like you said, I've been in a bunch of positions across the school district. So in multiple school districts, from everything from before and after care provider to up to principal, and now work in central office. And I've been on the outside in the philanthropic space for a hot second, as well as an intern. So I've been all over the place. And I've been doing this DEI, this equity, social justice work for decades. I think my first training that I led was in 2001. And so it's been a long time. And like you said, I even wrote a book about some of my experiences in a way, to an effort to help other folks. But I haven't always gotten it right. And I continue to not get it right, and just to try to get it less wrong as I grow, or more and more right as I move. For instance, I used to pride myself on being a person when I got to a new space. Some of my community members, particularly, I'm African American, I'm Black, and I get to a new school, and some Black parents would inevitably walk up to me in every new space I've been and say, "We are so glad you are here. We're not sure the people here understand us."
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought I was super equity guy, and that's how that works, because I'm just a magnet for social justice, and people feel great around me and all of that stuff. And once I had I had been in this school for 3 years, and I got a Latina student teacher. And my Hispanic families walked up to her and said, "I am so glad you are here, because we're not sure he understands us." Right. And so it was really eye-opening for me that I really have to pay more attention to how I carry myself, and to be more humble with the way I think, what I think I know. One other piece I want to add to that, is a little more serious. So I was already in the process of thinking through this book. And I was a principal at the time, an elementary school principal, and we had a parent meeting with one of my parents. It was an Asian family, and the student was struggling. And the conversation was basically, let us give him some extra help. We don't need to hold that person back. We want to give that person that student some extra help. So we'll have my reading specialist go out to your house and read with him twice a week. And we have my math specialist who's going to come and communicate with you. So I said, well, I'm going to run and this was just right before summer break. I'm going to run upstairs to our book room and I'm going to grab some books and give it to you so he can keep them during the summer. It took me over 40 minutes to find a book on his reading level with an Asian main character.
Mm.
It should not have happened on my watch. But that's what I thought, again, I was super equity guy. I'm writing a book about this stuff. And I continue to be unaware of some things, right? And it's
Well,
all just a growth experience every day.
well, Damon, I appreciate both your courage and your humility by recognizing both the things that you've learned, but also the things where you still want to grow. And I appreciated your courage and humility with your book as well, because you tell the story of what it was like to be a leader in a school, recognizing what you're unaware of, but also what your staff is unaware of, and trying to invite other people into that journey with you. And before we jump into your book, can you tell us a little bit more about your work with Bond and your history with your most recent school districts? Because you've done so much work. And before we dive into the nitty gritties of your book, I just want listeners to get a better sense of what you do on a regular basis and some of the work that you're currently up to.
Absolutely. And listeners, you can click like and click subscribe and rate the podcast that you're on right now, the Principal Matters, and pause, and you can go to bondeducators.org. That's the website, and it explains the Bond Project in more detail. The Bond Project is a nonprofit that supports Black and Latino men in education, and it really sort of grew from an organic set of conversations with some central office folks and some teacher level folks in a school district in the Mid-Atlantic, where we noticed that there were some needs that weren't being recognized and attended to in the school district with respect to not just students, but staff as well. And so a group of us got together and tried to think through what could we do to support each other. And out of that came we did a bunch of research. We ran focus groups with different guys in the system. And we came out of that saying, we need an organization. That's what we need. And we need a voice. That's what we need. We need to support each other through mentorship. So we created a mentorship program within this organization that we named the Building Our Network of Diversity Project, or BOND as we call it. And from there, our membership started saying, hey, we also need an opportunity to write, to put stuff out into the world. So we created a blog, and our guys can post there. Guys said we want to be able to speak, like everybody has a podcast now. So we want to be able to share what we have that way too. So we created a podcast. Guys said, we are priced out of these annual conferences from these organizations, even sometimes ones that are targeted towards us. And we can't afford to get there. So, and when our guys say they want to present at these conferences, we get rejected. We don't get a lot of feedback as to why. We're not sure. So we created our own annual conference. And we give feedback and we train folks up to to have their first national conference presentation. So when what wasn't there for us, we created it.
Oh my gosh, Damon. So I have to stop there for just a moment and give you and just celebrate everything that you just said, because I don't know, at the time that this recording comes out, hopefully my newest book will be published, but I've been working on a book that I call Whose Permission Are You Waiting For? An educator's guide to doing what you love. And the thing I love about you, your work, not just the work that I know we're going to share from your book, but the work that you're doing now for yourself and for other educators, is when there's a closed door, we're going to create an open one.
Yep.
When we want an opportunity to share our expertise and our gifts, then we're going to If someone doesn't give it to us, we're going to find one and create one. And so, Principal Matters listeners, I just want you to, if you're interested in checking out those resources, we'll put a link at the end of the show notes, but bondeducators.org. And I've listened to your podcast, and it is a fantastic way for leaders to just engage with other leaders and to be inspired. And so thank you for that, Daman. Let's talk a little bit about and you host podcasts, so you know how hard it is to dive into something that you have spent so much time thinking and writing about, and think about how in a succinct way to discuss it. So I want to do myself and listeners the favor of just reading some of the titles of your chapters, some of the tools that you help leaders manage in this book. Your book gives leaders so many tools for how to educate themselves, how to commit themselves, how to cast an anti-racist vision, how to plan PD, how to encourage and embrace resistance, how to elevate an anti-racist curriculum and instruction, and how to monitor their impact. So let's back up and talk about first what inspired you to write that book, and then you decide which direction you want to go in terms of some of those how-tos that might help listeners as they think about their own journeys.
Will do. And the inspiration came from actually it came out of the Bond Project. So there were a few other guys who've written books before, and I aspired to do that. I talked to a group of high schoolers outside of Houston in Conroe, Texas, a little while ago, and one of the things I said to them as a point of inspiration is, I don't hang out with people who don't inspire me. Mm. Right. And so that the Bond members, we inspire each other. So when I seen so many of our guys who've written books and talked about their experiences, I wanted to do that too. And some other guys in Bond also wanted to do that. So we created a writer's room where we got together and brainstormed ideas and shared chapter titles and potential working titles and topics and all those sorts of things, and gave each other feedback. One guy was working on a blog, another guy was working on a screenplay, and I was working on book. And acquisitions editor reached out to me and said, "Hey, I've heard you talk somewhere, and I saw you post on somebody's blog some stuff, and we think you have a book in you." So that's where that book sort of process started. But the seeds were planted when I was in my school building and when I travel around and talk to folks. So the work I was doing in my school building, I was working in a school I was a principal of a school that had 80% students eligible for free and reduced meals, that had 2/3 of our students were multilingual learners, that 90% of my students were first or second generation from either Central America or South America, or from Northeast Africa, in particular, Eritrea and Ethiopia. So we had a school full of students who fit the mold of the students who wouldn't achieve, right? And so the work I was doing with my staff, I started talking about on the road when I went to talk to other groups of people. And people would say to me, I understand that there's our system is broken, right? Because that's what I focused on with my staff. I said, we spend a lot of time trying to fix holes in our kids and their families, and it hasn't worked to move our data. We need to spend some more time focused on the systems that recreate this hierarchy. And that's where we're going to put our energy going forward for the next 3-4 years. And I gave them a little vision using some graphics and say, these are the steps we're going to take. And so that same conversation I had with other folks on the road, and they'd say, "What are my first steps? I know the system is broken. I just don't know what to do. I'm not sure if my community is receptive. I'm not sure if my staff is ready. I'm not sure if I have the capacity to push people forward. What do I do?" And that's where the book came from. It was, hey, you can do these 6 things. And all of those chapters, the 6 chapters, all start with verbs, because this is an act, right? We are not passively moving through this school leadership journey, right? Like Herman Edwards said, the football coach, you're either coaching it or you're allowing it to happen. So we're going to push some other things to happen. And that's where we get to educating yourself and committing to the work. That's where you have to cast an anti-racist vision to your staff. How do you set up professional learning? Folks think that when somebody says, I'm not comfortable with this, or I'm unsure how to step, that is active resistance. Even if it is, it's welcomed, because these are family members and we all have to move forward as a family. And we have to think through why that resistance exists, right? It doesn't mean, like, if I'm not ready to listen to someone who says they have an opposing point of view and maybe be willing to change my mind about this, if they give me new data, then why would I expect them to do the same, right? They shouldn't be ready. I shouldn't expect them to be ready to change for me. And, it always gets to, so where's the teaching and learning aspect of this? There's a chapter on that. And then monitoring your impact, because that's what your boss is going to say. So like those steps are there. And sometimes folks take them a la carte because they feel more or less comfortable in different areas. And I'm all for that.
Let's take a moment to thank our sponsors, and then we'll be right back.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Jen Schwanke, and I will be hosting a summer masterclass to be held on June 3rd at 11 a.m. that focuses on managing school conflict. If you are tired of school conflict throwing you off track, or if you wish you could turn those tense moments into opportunities for growth, you'll want to join our high-impact virtual session. It's designed for principals, aspiring leaders, and teacher leaders. So get ready to ditch the avoidance and embrace conflict head-on through a deep dive into understanding types of conflict, mastering the anticipate, analyze, act cycle, tackling common school conflicts, empowering others, and even confronting your own role in conflict. This session will be a dynamic, interactive experience providing practical tips you can use today. So transform your school culture and become a conflict resolution powerhouse. Register at williamdparker.com/guide. And I hope to see you all there. Thank you.
Everyone talks about the power of data-driven instruction, but how do you actually get the right insights and know the best next steps? The secret is IXL. IXL helps you easily assess performance and determines the best path forward for each student. Whether you need data for benchmarking or intervention planning, IXL can do it all. And IXL doesn't stop at assessments. It also provides you with everything else your school needs, from a standards-aligned K-12 curriculum to actionable analytics. IXL's online learning and teaching platform is research proven to improve student outcomes and is used by 95 of the top 100 U.S. school districts. If you also want to start driving real progress, get started today at ixl.com/PM. So when you think about the work that you did as a principal, and now you're doing that work in supporting leaders in their schools, and you and I both know that people are on the spectrum when it comes to their awareness or lack of awareness, their understanding of systems that support learning and systems that hurt learning, the amount of professional development that they've had that creates more awareness, or the lack of that. And so Daman, let's speak to both of those groups for a second. First of all, I want to speak to leaders who may recognize, or well, let me put it this way, to leaders whom you sometimes encounter who don't recognize their unawareness. And then I want to speak to the other leaders whose awareness is very strong. They're very committed to diversity in their schools. But let's talk to both groups. And so as you're speaking first to educators whose own awareness may need to develop, what are some things that you would like to say to them through this work?
Yeah, I'd say examine your data, right? And I know the folks who listen to this podcast are certainly looking at their data. What I don't know is if they are teasing out the disparate impacts on different groups of students. So if you've had the same hierarchy, if you look at one of the images I write in the book is in casting the vision to folks, is I share a line graph. So folks can imagine line graph shows change over time. And if you say this line graph is going to be stuff that shows positive results in schools. So GPA, graduation rates, honor roll percentages, you name it. And now each of my lines on that line graph is going to represent a different racial ethnic group. I could put 5 lines on there at different heights on that graph, going across the last 5, 10, 15, 20, 100 years. Like folks can pick it. I don't have to tell you which racial or ethnic groups are represented by those lines in order for you to have a really good idea which one it is. If it's been like that at your school for 5 years, for 10, you name it, because it's been like that in our country for 100.
Mhm.
You have to ask, what's the reason? And when you do that root cause analysis, how much of that do you spend focused on fixing holes in kids and families? And if that's the case, then something's wrong with the system that you have that isn't addressing even what you say is wrong, right? Because you're still getting the same results. And systems get what they're designed. Like my buddy Asher Hughes, I forgot where he said he got it from, but one of those sayings is systems are going to system, right?
Mhm.
So you're going to get those same results. So what are you going to do about that? Right? And this
So
piece goes, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
no. I love that. So what is the impact on the demographics that are reflected in your data? And just be honest, how are those racial and ethnic groups represented in that data? And then ask yourself the question, if this is a historical trend that we're seeing here, what's broken about this system? And what do we need to examine? Because if we keep getting the same results from the same system, then the system's broken. Because every child has the same capacity for learning
Mhm.
and being exceptional in their learning. And so that's such a great place to start. Damon, go ahead and finish that other thought.
Yeah, and I'd say that the folks there spend, well, if we could just have parents who fill in the blank, if we could just have community supports who fill in the blank, if we could just have central office supports who, fill in the blank. You got the same people, you get the same people every year, right? Like I tell people, I've been in a bunch, 3 different school districts full time, and it's the same play with a different cast of characters in each space.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to get the same folks next year. How are you changing, right? How are you changing the inputs and the system, your inputs on that system so that the other inputs that come in, even if they're the same, those outputs change? And that's the work. Sometimes people don't recognize that. And sometimes it's in the smallest stories that we tell folks. Jay Van Bevel and Dominic Packer write The Power of Us. That book is really strong. And in there they write some tools for identity leadership, right? And they just talk about how folks elevate stories that symbolize common virtues and common causes. So when you share a story like I did about my Asian student that I dropped the ball on, right? That's something that folks can relate to and say, we got to be better. So then we should be auditing our curriculum, our book room, our library, right? Well, how do we do that? Like that's a thing. And it doesn't have to just be based on race, right? It's immigration status, any number of things, right?
Yeah.
That we have to address. So that's a big part of it. Another one is that folks, when I talk to people and I say, hey, because most of my staff, a lot of them, a majority, a plurality of my staff were white women, right? And some of them said, we're not sure we buy into like this race thing, that it's an issue, right? That racism or our systemic obstacles are the issue. And I said to them, I get it. And let's talk more about it and help me think through it. And during our conversations, I asked questions to them about sexism and patriarchy. Right?
Mm.
And it said, well, obviously there's patriarchy, right? Obviously there's sexism. Look at our school district. We are 80% women teachers, but we are 80% male principals.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously there's a thing there, right? And so then I said, oh, that makes sense. And so I went to them and I shared a story, and I put this in the book too, where my wife and we went to Napa a few years ago as I was writing the book. We went to Napa before the pandemic and just did some wine stuff. We're sipping some wine, and I said to her, "Hey, the server gave me a heavier pour than you. How is that's funny, this time." And she said, and I tell people all the time, we have more than one glass, don't judge us. So she said, yeah, haha, he did that every single time. Haha, sexism. Isn't that hilarious? And I didn't pick that up. And I said, wait, oh, you said, I didn't know. Like, we got to tell him. And she said, no, we don't have to tell him. Right. We need to enjoy our time and move on. We're not going to waste our vacation having a conversation with him. That's not the role right now. Right. And the point, like when I shared that piece and how my staff was feeling about the patriarchy,
Mhm.
light bulbs went off to folks. And I closed the loop by explaining to them what I got from both of those experiences.
Mhm.
It's hard for me to see obstacles that I don't face. So I need people who experience those obstacles to share those with me. And I can even take some guidance from them on how to react to said obstacles.
Man, Damon, this is so good. Um, I, there's so much I love about that for when you're trying to help someone become aware of something that they're not aware of, which is getting into their own skin, helping them to see the things that are systemic disparities in their own experiences, like sexism and 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 patriarchal systems, or recognizing in ourselves how hard it is to see obstacles that we don't face ourselves, and so trying to put ourselves into the experience of someone else. But you're also speaking to, I know there's listeners out there too who are committed to understanding the disparities in their schools, committed to trying to create more equity. And I'm just going to be frank, in the political system that we live in, sometimes it's a it's a weary battle, to know that
Mhm.
you are trying to do something that is so good for kids, and then you're also facing like just crazy weird culture pressures that somehow make it politically incorrect to want to help kids
Mhm.
with these disparities. So talk to that leader that he or she may already be aware of this, and being a champion for students. What are some words of encouragement for that leader of how to get deeper and how to stay effective, and how to keep their heads on, even in the crazy political landscape that we have right now?
Yeah, I think so. Two things, right? So one is we have to balance who gets centered in your work, and that is in the planning, that is in the implementation, that is in the evaluation phases of whatever work you were doing. So even if you are doing work that is there to uplift or some certain groups of students who has historically been underserved, you still have to provide space and centering and conversation and supports for other students, right? And it sometimes it's easy when we think about things like, well, easier, but less hard. Teaching's hard, and being a school leader is hard, right? So maybe it's less hard sometimes because in that old saying with students with special needs and special education supports, what's good for one, what's essential for one is likely going to be good for most, right? Or helpful to most. So sometimes it's less hard when we do that centering, but sometimes we really have to pay extra attention. And it's okay for, in this case, if we're talking about race, it's okay to have conversations about how white people are feeling about this, right? Because sometimes people feel like they can't move forward because they're going to make a mistake
Mm.
and they're going to be written off and cast into some evil pile by their colleagues. Sometimes people feel like they can't engage in this work because some of their other colleagues are going to kick them out of the group because you now are one of them, right? Because we create, and I write about this in that book too. Jennifer Nordell writes in The End of Bias a lot about this, how we create us and them
Mm.
all the time. And we want to make sure we stay in us, in our in groups. And that means sometimes if you step out and want to try to do some work that changes systems with the focus on equity, then sometimes other folks get upset. Your home team, so to speak. And folks are upset about that. So we have to balance all those competing priorities and those competing thoughts of our stakeholders when we're having these conversations and when we're rolling these things out. These things can't only be a focus on students of color or students of poverty or students who may be undocumented. Same with the evaluation.
Mm.
You need to when you're asking teachers for their perspective, you need to have focus groups with everybody. right? Not and your community members, you need to have focus groups and conversations with everybody. And one other thing. So when you are, I just said this to someone in Texas just this weekend. When it is important for you as a leader to follow your heart and to follow your passion and to follow your community's needs, that's essential. But it is equally as important to follow your district's guidelines. You can't get fired, right? You are too important. Your school needs you, right? Your community needs you because you were thinking about this in the right way. You can't get fired because of politics right now. And for people to say, well, we don't deal with identity. Of course you do. Not dealing with identity is an identity, right? All of what we do is identity. But that doesn't mean that you still can't figure out ways to make sure you are supportive of everyone in your community. You just have to be a little more strategic. And what's cool is that you have people like you who run this podcast who give them just that.
Well, I love the wisdom. And just like everything in leadership, Damon, the complexities that are involved in doing what's right for kids requires you to take a step back and recognize the complexities and the nuance. But I'm just going to repeat what you said, that while you're following your heart and your passion and your commitments to meet the needs of students, you're equally responsible to follow the guidelines and the priorities of your district. And you can do both. And I'll just say to listeners, if you find that an impossibility, that your passions and priorities and commitments and the district's guidelines and priorities, if they're like completely contrary to one another, you need to be in a different place. So, but sometimes, and we all know this, whether it's state or federal or district, sometimes, not sometimes, leaders are always managing guidelines or priorities or initiatives that may not be the thing that was the most important for their school that year or their students or their teachers. But we learn to politely comply, but we also learn how to still do what we know is best for kids. We've always done that, David. It's just great teachers have always done that. Great leaders have always done that. Great citizens have always done that. So I do want to encourage leaders that are listening to this conversation, because I know right now sometimes if things feel discouraging when you're trying to manage all these nuances, do not be discouraged. Remember, you're not alone, and that the benefits that students and teachers have of committed leaders that are still willing to do the right thing and to love kids and to be present and to model for them is always going to reap a better harvest. Anything else you want to add on that, Damon, before I ask you a couple of follow-up questions?
No, sir. I think that's right on point.
Okay. Well, I want to change gears because this is a podcast that's listened to by both aspiring leaders and veteran leaders. I have a lot of younger leaders that'll reach out to me when they're stepping into the work for the first time and they maybe discover the podcast. So when I have an experienced leader in the room, I like to ask them for some thoughts that they would give to that newer leader, somebody that may be stepping into the work for the first or second year, or maybe even stepping into a new position for the first time. It could, because you, like it or not, Damon, you're a veteran leader now. So what are some things you would like to say to that aspiring or newer leader that may be stepping into a new opportunity?
Educate yourself, right? So all the other things we said to the other folks all the way up to this point, yes, but educate yourself on this content and on these topics. There are a number of different places where you can find opportunities to read, to write, to listen, to view, to even and speak with folks about this topic. So don't think that you are alone in this work. So just spend some time and get the lay of the land. Right. There are a couple of tools that I present in the book that allow you to think through in really broad strokes. Okay, where are the safe spaces? Where are the spaces that might not be safe to touch right now? What texts would help push my thinking? What podcasts, what articles would help me think differently about this? So take your time and do that. Find an accountability partner. Find a person in this work that is a kindred spirit who is committed with you, so that even when you struggle, because being a principal can sometimes be isolated, you can sometimes feel like you're on an island anyway, you can find other building leaders in your area or in the region or even in the country who are thinking through these types of topics and can give you some more insight, especially people who've been doing this work a little longer than you, and even better if they're doing this work in your context a little longer than you. So find some accountability partners, find some mentorship, and begin to educate yourself on these topics and get the lay of the land before you take action.
I love that. I'm going to add one other thought too, and this is just because I um, have a friend who leads in a large school district who ran into a situation where a course that they were offering, I'm not going to name the place because of the politics, but they were offering a course on equity and diversity that got challenged by some new board members as to whether this was an appropriate course for the district, which just blows my mind that someone would even question that. But I thought strategically one of the wisest things that these leaders did was they brought students to the board.
Mm,
They brought,
mm,
and of course, this was in a secondary setting where the students were able to speak for themselves and they were persuasive. But my friend was telling me that in the process of that meeting, it was the patient persuasiveness of those students that
wow.
turned the table. And
Mm,
by the end of that meeting, even though it wasn't unanimous, the majority of those board members voted to maintain that coursework for that school. And the next day they were celebrating that small win because they
mhm.
recognized that in the scheme of the things, it's sad that those conversations even have to happen. But in the perspective of that moment, they recognized that it was really the voice of students themselves saying, "This is the value we're finding in this kind of awareness, in these studies. These are the examples that we're learning that have helped us become better citizens of this school, and in their own ability to articulate that was just beautiful. So I think for any leaders out there listening too, and this was, and I'm going to speak to my own experience too, Damon, because I feel like I still have a lot to learn, but the best places for me often to get my fingers on the pulse of what was happening with students was to talk to students.
Absolutely.
And so sitting down with your kids and asking them what their experiences are and making sure that you're staying close to what's most important to them so that, like you said, you know what the safe spaces are, you know the things that may not need to be touched directly, but maybe indirectly. And then making sure, I love your suggestion on an accountability partner, having someone else who walks through it with you so that they can pull you back if you're going too far or caution you or encourage you to be more courageous in those settings too. So as we wrap up, I want listeners to know how they can stay connected with your work. We're going to put a link to your book in the show notes, Damon, but thank you for the amazing work that you're doing for schools and for leaders and for leaders of color. You in your podcast, in the work that you're doing with Bond, but how can listeners stay connected with you? And if they want to reach out or find out more about your resources, please tell them how they can do that. And then any parting words of advice that you want to give.
Absolutely. And so you can find me on LinkedIn. That's where I'm most active social media wise is Daman. I am Daman Harris. So Daman Harris. I think I'm the only one on there. So be easy to find. You can find me online at damonharris.com. If you want to email me, it is damon@damonharris.com. If you go through the contact me portal on my website, it goes to I don't know where. But people have told me they're trying to reach me, and person can't figure out how to get it to come to me. So you need to go to my email. Just email me directly, Daman Daman at damonharris.com.
I love
And
that.
really, the one sentence that I would give to folks when they're thinking about this kind of work and how it may seem overwhelming and they may feel isolated is you are only alone if you choose to be.
Mm,
There are a number of people who are outside of the bubble you are in who think differently, who have other ideas, who are ready to support, even if it's not in an organized fashion, as a nonprofit like mine, there are still folks who are gathering and doing book studies and doing community walks where they're talking through topics and town halls. And so you are only alone if you choose to be. Come find us.
Well, Principal Matters listeners, the book is The Antiracist School Leader Want to Know, Say, and Do by Dr. Daman Harris. Both as I said earlier, a courageous and a humble approach to ways to lead your school communities in the ways that you know students deserve. Dr. Harris, thank you so much for your leadership and for all that you're doing. And Principal Matters listeners, thank you for doing what matters. We'll talk to you again next week. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, would you take a moment and like, share, subscribe, or leave us a review? In fact, if you share it out with a friend, even more people can become a part of these conversations. Sign up for our newsletter at williamdparker.com for even more free resources. And don't forget to check out our website to learn more about our books, professional development offerings, Grow Academies, masterminds, executive coaching, and keynote presentations. Wow, let's keep learning together. And thank you for doing what matters.
Principal Matters.